Alright, so just want to take a minute here and explain to you guys some stuff I figured out about electronic ignitions and stuff like that and trying to get my car to work. I apologize if you can hear this like PTO noise behind me. It's a truck at my neighbor's house blowing insulation in their attic or something over there. But anyway, so to get started here, I traded a guy some wheels a while back for this billet distributor right here and a Holley ignition control box, which, you know, similar to this MSD. It was just a Holley brand kind of deal, but it was sort of older. And you can look in some of my previous stuff. I actually mounted it like way under there, kind of under where the heater fan would go on the inside of my fender well, back there on the firewall, whatever. Way up under there. Didn't test it first, just bolted it on, thought it'd all be good. Ended up not being good, so I had to tear a bunch of that apart again to take it off of there, which kind of sucked. But so that'd be a lesson, you know, maybe hook up some of this stuff and test it before you actually install it. Save yourself some hassle. But more or less, we were trying to test this to see if it worked when I had that ignition box in there and everything. So went and got the super cheap Walmart battery just so I had something to power this system up. And so you can actually, if you have everything wired in, ignition boxes are pretty basic. You know, they have the directions on the back, but more or less you have just one wire will go to a constant hot, like to the battery. There's a ground wire, a switched wire, and then, you know, like there's two wires. One goes positive and negative kind of thing to the distributor. And the distributor, if it's just a regular one, I'll get into this in a minute, but there's kind of like two different distributors. Well, there's actually several, kind of three main ones, but there's one that's meant to run with an ignition box. So that's kind of like what this one is. There's an HEI style, which is, you know, really gigantic. I didn't want to go that route because it wouldn't fit without bashing the firewall, and I didn't want to do that. So HEI has the coil built into it, and all the electronics and stuff, kind of it just runs off of itself. Doesn't really need an ignition box. And then there is actually a third kind that has everything sort of built into it, has a module in there. So anyway, so I had this stuff hooked up, and there's, you know, this one, just two wires for this distributor here. So if you have all your stuff hooked up, you can actually, in theory, you can take your distributor out, and you can like, let's show you over here. So my coil is actually mounted inside my firewall over there. I don't know if you can see it real well, but you can run a coil wire out here and like ground it to something, you know, just a bolt or whatever you can put on your header, just so it has a ground where, you know, it'll spark. So if you have everything hooked up and you have that grounded, you just pull the distributor out and spin the shaft around, you know, real quick, just give it some spins. You should, you know, your coil should zap on whatever over here. If it's working properly, you'll see sparks, it'll zap, everything will be cool. So mine did nothing, so that was kind of not good. But then I had to determine what was not working. So I didn't know if like my coil was bad, the distributor, or the ignition box. So my brother, he's like a mechanic, so he helped me out on this a little bit. So what we actually did was we hooked a coil up, and I think what we did was we took like the positive terminal of it, and we actually jumpered it across from the positive terminal to just a hot, I think maybe it was a switched power source. We had I have some fuse blocks under there on the inside of the firewall. So with the key on, everything hooked up, and we jumpered. I'm pretty sure, I mean, don't quote me on this 100%, but I'm pretty sure I took and plugged a wire to the positive side of the coil, and then I just touched it to a switched power terminal or switch source under the dash there, see if it would spark. I mean, I didn't hold it on there, but just, you know, kind of touched it, see if it spark would happen, and that told us the coil was good. So there was spark there. So the next thing was to determine whether this distributor was not working or whether that ignition box I had was bad. So really the only way to do that was to get a different ignition box and hook it up and just like see what happens. So anyway, so my brother has a turbo car, and he has this extra 6 BTM laying around because he had to switch out and do something else. So Technically this would work on my car, but it's kind of hard to explain, I guess. It's just not really what I want to use. But anyway, so we brought this box over. We just kind of ran the wiring to everything that needed to be hooked up to, and spun the distributor again. You know, we just kind of held the terminals together on there. I actually got some spark to happen. So, trying to remember what we did to rule out the ignition box entirely, but we were able to test with a jump light too, or like a test light. Remember, when I had the ignition box hooked up, we were not getting coil or power out of the box to the coil at all, so, or at least from the ignition box. But when we had this distributor hooked up, you know, with this box, it sparked, so the distributor was good and everything. So anyway, so it turns out that box was bad over there. So I have to get something different. So kind of figuring out what to do. This distributor here is technically good, but it has to work with an ignition box because it just has a magnetic pickup in it. So when it spins, it sends a signal back to the box to tell everything to spark and all that. So I was kind of asking around to see if anyone that I knew had another one of these, like a 6AL or something, hanging out that I could get real cheap. I was looking on Craigslist, couldn't find nothing. But someone that I'd messaged about it sells a lot of parts and stuff here in town. And he was telling me that he had a distributor with the module and everything built into it. And I hadn't heard of that before. So I did a little research, and MSD actually seems to be about the only one that makes an actual full-on distributor with the module in it and everything, but it's pretty expensive. It's like almost $400, but there's a couple other alternatives I've been looking at. But anyway, so that's cool. So you can actually buy a distributor that essentially has a box built into it, just has a smaller module, and it's the same size as this. It's not like a giant HEI or anything like that. So that's really convenient. You don't got to hack up your firewall or nothing, make it work. So I'm going to get one of those. And then that totally eliminates the need for the exterior, you know, control box. So you just basically hook up like a power, I think it's switch power, ground, and then there's like the two wires, positive, negative to your coil, and that's it. So that'll work really cool. So I'm working on that still, but maybe that'll help someone out trying to get their car running. One of you guys is having these same difficulties. This car originally did have a points distributor in it, which, I mean, a lot of the older cars did in the 60s and 70s and stuff. I actually didn't want to use that anymore, so I ripped all that wiring out to go to this setup. But if you do have a points distributor, there is like a conversion you can get, like Pertronics makes one. It's a real common one. Essentially, you can kind of pull some of the guts out of your points distributor, take the points out, put the little Pertronics module in there, and essentially end up with a distributor that has a module that'll work, you know, kind of like this same setup. So anyways, gonna get this video rendered out for you guys and put on there. If you have any more questions or anything, you know, just hit me up, leave a comment, and I'm gonna get on to another video here with some more stuff I've been working on.